Rob really needs no introduction, except if he ever shaved his beard, in which case nobody would ever recognize him at all. And I see him sitting there, and he's already got the best prop, Room Raider 10 of 10, a bottle of Botanist gin to kick off his conversation.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody, and thanks for having me. This is such a fun little format, so I appreciate everybody that helped put this together. And for those of you that are in this talk, look, I appreciate you. Don't get me wrong. However, in track one is Brandon, and I believe it's Brandon's first cybersecurity presentation that he's giving. So it's getting recorded. I'm gonna give the talk anyways. You're not gonna hurt my feelings, but you should totally go support Brandon. Other than that, for those of you that are sticking around anyways or looking in the recording, we'll go ahead and jump in with the talk. This talk is around structuring intelligence assessments and Gen cocktails. And we'll spend roughly 15 to 20 minutes in the beginning talking about cyber threat intelligence and mostly around the intelligence assessments themselves. And then I'll spend the next 15, 20 minutes after that making Gen cocktails. And then hours after that, enjoying my cocktails while you all continue on with your conference. And I put a blog link, it's up on the screen as well, but I put it in the Slack, in the track 2 Slack. Essentially, this blog is going to be the talk. I wrote it last night. Just make sure that people can review it and be able to read it as they'd like. Not a huge PowerPoint fan, so we're not going to do any slides today. And then down at the end of the blog, there is my spreadsheet with the Gen cocktails that we're going to talk about, and some of them we'll make today. So anyways, hello, folks. My name is Rob Lee. I'm the CEO and co-founder over at Dragos, which all we really do is industrial cybersecurity, so like ICS and OT stuff. Today, my presentations have nothing to do with that, except for the fact that you need control systems often in large-scale Gen production. So maybe there's a tie-in anyways. But as mentioned today, I wanted to talk about intelligence assessment. So let's start off. I will highlight the sections of the blog that we'll talk about. I'll talk about things beyond the blog so that it's actually useful for you, but that way it'll kind of center you in the right locations. Before we care about the blog at all, though, before you take a look at it, want to start off with a quick discussion of really what cyber threat intelligence is in the first place. There's plenty of you that probably deal with it in some form or fashion, but oftentimes what I find is that people have perceptions of cyber threat intelligence largely generated by marketing and media and vendors talking about CTI and so forth. But really all intelligence is analyzed information about a requirement. Generally, that satisfies a requirement, I should say. Generally, it relates to adversaries, but that would be those that have the intent, opportunity, and capability to do you harm. So that's really all we're talking about when you talk about threat intelligence is I've analyzed information to come up with some insights and knowledge about the adversary that helps meet somebody's requirement. That first piece that is really important to foot stomp is the requirement. You can do a lot of intelligence stuff and skill sets that are the same for intelligence analysts, but not actually be doing intelligence. In other words, there is no intel for intel's sake. We usually call that the self-licking ice cream cone. If you are not satisfying somebody else's requirement, you're probably not actually really doing cyber threat intelligence. The whole starting and ending place is somebody in the world has a knowledge gap or pain point about an adversary, and they're trying to address that. And so that's where we get involved. Now, the first key point, and this is where I start highlighting the blog, first key point could really be summarized as those 3 words there, which is you do you. I am pretty opinionated, and I'm opinionated about the world of intel and how I would do things versus how other people would do things. And I'll tell you, it doesn't matter. If you are satisfying the requirement of your consumer and you're doing it in an honest way, then everybody else's opinion is just that. It's an opinion, and the critique is probably not all that valid. I think there are some things that you can do really, really poorly. As an example, I think a lot of the ways that I see security teams track threat groups, as an example, tends to be around malware. They focus on the malware itself, some technical artifacts, maybe the exploit being leveraged. Maybe they focus on word usage, keyword usage, file names, folder paths, install paths, various things about the malware. And then they'll start to cluster intrusions based on that malware. That may be really useful to somebody, but I have a little bit of problem with the over focus we place on it, because oftentimes what you're tracking is not necessarily the group doing the operations, but the group that developed the malware. And in some parts of the world and in some circles and some adversary groups, if you will, they might be one and the same. But especially as you talk about state operations or larger criminal groups, usually the people that are developing the malware are not the same people acquiring and managing the infrastructure that is being leveraged, are not the same people that are actually on keyboard doing the operation, are not the same people actually doing the analysis on what they get out of those operations. So sometimes our large focus on clustering or grouping intrusions or adversary attempts to get into your networks by malware can be misleading. So what we actually want to track, which might be the tactics, techniques, and procedures of the adversary, which relates to more of the keyboard operators and what they're doing during the operation. So I can sit back and go through that and say, oh, look, I think that's interesting. I think that might be wrong. But at the end of the day, if you are generating intelligence and generating insights that satisfy someone's requirement, my sitting on the sidelines and being like, well, I would have done it this way, or I would have done it that way is largely irrelevant. Now we can all try to push each other to be better. And hey, I think you can use these areas to be better. I think you can consider these collection gaps or knowledge gaps. And we start throwing out all those fun intel words. We can be collaborative as a community and critique each other as long as we keep it respectful. But at the end of the day, don't let analysts get in the way of you and your consumer. And I joke around and highlight at the beginning that generally speaking, the only thing that analyst 1 and analyst 2 can agree on is the analyst 3 is wrong. You're not going to have a whole lot of intelligence analysts that agree about most things, let alone everything. If we did, that's a problem. It means there's probably a bunch of biases getting in our way, like groupthink. And it's unlikely we're all coming to the same conclusion. So I'm going to walk through some of my suggestions as it relates to intelligence assessments, but they really are just that. Okay. You should go through and actually just make sure that you're satisfying your requirements. Now, I did highlight that point about honesty, and I'm going to talk about that real quick, but we do deal in the world of trust. When a consumer, a business leader, maybe even the security operations analyst that hasn't dealt with CTI as much, when somebody looks into what we're doing and asks us for our assessments and our insights, it's very common that it looks weird. And it's like, how did you derive all of that out of NetFlow and malware? How did you come to that conclusion? And ultimately, it can kind of fall into one of two camps. One camp is it's such an obvious conclusion in hindsight, that hindsight bias being another type of bias to be careful of. But it's such an obvious conclusion in hindsight. There's questions that get raised about why did it take you that long to generate that assessment? And sometimes it falls in the exact opposite camp, which is it takes us a long time to get to an answer. We got to an answer and nobody really knows how to repeat that. Like from an external perspective, not another Intel analyst, but the consumer, I might be looking at what you came up with and it just looks like, dark magic. It's like, what? How did you get that? And so because to our consumers, they may not have the expertise we do on the field that we're focusing, just like every other security field out there, it really relies on a lot of trust. And I often tell people that if you were ever caught misleading people or in any way misguiding them based on your own biases, desires, and personal agendas or so forth, you ought to pack up and go home. Pick some other field. That stuff gets out as it should. And because we deal so much in trust, eroding that trust will largely kill somebody's career. Just as a quick example, if we look back to let's say the Democratic National Convention compromise of 2016. And for those of you who are like, I didn't want to deal with politics, like it's the world of Intel, man, like wrong talk. All right. So if you look at the Democratic National Convention compromise of 2016, NSA, CIA, and FBI all came out and made assessments about who was responsible for the DNC compromise and why. And they actually showed really good maturity in their assessments, where they all came up with a high confidence that Russia was responsible, but they had a little bit of different confidence levels as related to the why it took place. CIA and FBI came up with a high confidence assessment that Putin wanted Trump to win the election. NSA got there as well, but they came up with a moderate confidence assessment. So from a consumer perspective, other folks may have looked into that and go, oh, well, NSA and CIA and FBI aren't fully aligned. CIA and FBI have a high confidence. NSA has a moderate confidence. As we'll talk about later, a moderate confidence assessment is still a really good assessment, but likely for the reason for the disconnect is it's, even though it's not actually disconnected, is the collection that a CIA or FBI is going to have largely relates to human intelligence and the ability to talk to individuals and be in the room, where NSA historically depends more on signals intelligence, telephone calls, cyber data of some sort. And for that type of assessment that gets into the intent of an adversary, really helpful to have that human collection. So because NSA didn't have all the collection that CIA and FBI had, they weren't able to get to the same confidence level, right? But let's roll that back to the whole point of trust. So what was the disconnect? Well, when FBI, CIA, and NSA gave out that assessment, a lot of news publications, and I'm not talking just Fox, just MSNBC or CNN, but a lot of news publications, a lot of the majors came out and started having guests from their shows and talking about how we couldn't really trust the assessment. And if you go back and set Google to just the time period and look around the reasons given for not trusting the assessment, the number one reason cited was the WMDs in Iraq. And people were saying, look, we trusted the intelligence community back after 9/11, and they misled us, and our politicians and leaders misled us about what was going on in Iraq. And there were not WMDs, and that was the pretense for the Iraq invasion. This is misleading. What if they're doing it again? And from an insider view, where I had spent time at the agency, I say the agency, NSA, my CIA colleagues always remind me that they call it the agency too, but let's be honest, it's lesser, said with love. When you look at the NSA's point of view, as an example, the NSA in 2016 was a different NSA that existed in 2001. Different people, different mission areas, people working on incident response and intrusion data related to hacking into the DNC are not the same people working on photos and insights into WMD movements in Iraq. But to the public, it's all intel. It was all the intelligence agencies, and it was, you guys misled us. So long story short, be very thoughtful with your assessment. It is better to be mistaken than to be wrong. It's an old intel axiom. The idea, of course, is it's okay to be mistaken, and then you correct yourself and you be transparent in that. But don't be wrong, and definitely don't be misleading. You will lose the trust of your consumers, and they just won't be able to rely on your assessments anymore. Because again, a lot of what we deal with is in trust. So part of that and part of having that trust is being precise in words. So I linked this article here, Words of Estimate Probability. If you go into this article, and it's free just to be able to go and take a look at it. It is essentially a manuscript written by Sherman Kent. Sherman Kent is one of the kind of godfathers of modern intelligence in many ways. And he'll go through and he talks about what words to use, what words not to use, kind of how they help a consumer make it take advantage of the information you present. But if you really boil it down, what Kent is saying very accurately is whatever you do, just be consistent and be precise. So if you're going to use words like almost certain and probable, as he has over here in this graph, he actually has a mathematical kind of consideration around it, saying almost certain is a 93% or better insight, give or take about 6%. Now, you're not going through and calculating each component of what you're doing to come up with a mathematical score. You could create a mental model or some sort of structured analytic technique to try to do that if you want. It would be too time consuming. But having it weighted with a number helps keep us honest between analysts, because maybe I could be pretty consistent in my own word usage, but as I get onto a team with 4, 5, 6, 7 different Intel members, the language between us can become a barrier. And so to sit everybody down and go, this word has a representation of around 93%, helps you understand the difference between almost certain and probable. Well, this one has roughly 75%. And it's not, again, to actually calculate up anything. It's just to put that there going, are you like 93% sure? Then if you are, you can use these types of words. And again, it doesn't matter so much what words you use, but I would create a scale on your team. You can just use the ones that Sherman put out. But no matter what you do, this is a good place for a style guide. So on an Intel team, you'll usually create a style guide, not like a grammar style guide that can be in there, but a style guide would include what words we use and which words we don't, the meaning behind them. If we do use other structured analytic techniques and mental models, if we have sample intelligence requirements that we've already satisfied, and how did that look, and what kind of outcomes do we usually address? What are our collection sources, if there's none that aren't too sensitive to put in a style guide? I mean, you sort of have the playbook for the Intel team, and this words of estimate probability are going to be a major portion of that. So as an example, I don't like the word belief. As Sergio would say, belief is for religion, not intelligence. I can't stand the idea of having belief. Well, I believe that the adversary might have intended to harm us, but they might have not anyways. Like, what? Like, you didn't feel confident with me giving you those words. It just seems sloppy and so forth. So not even just the might and the probables and the so forth, just depending on how you deliver it, it could really distract your consumer. But belief, what do you mean you believe? Do you actually have data to support this or not? It's not an element of belief. It's an element of I assess this or I don't. Am I just giving you a judgment call, or did I take the time to sit down and actually come up with an assessment? Either way, it's not belief. Now, you may not be so pedantic, but for me, I don't like the word belief. So in a style guide, we'd say, don't use the word belief. Instead, here's some other words to use in these different situations. And so again, it's okay whatever you do, so long as you're consistent, because, and this is another key point here, one of the most important things we as Intel analysts can do is reduce frictions and barriers for our consumers. A consumer does not care how smart you are. They do not care to get into the Intel report as if it's a forensic report, to go down and go, oh, God, they did this. Oh, here's the hashes for that. And okay, all right, I see the IDA Pro screenshots. Like, that's not necessary. You can put some candy in your reports if you want, but put it in an appendix or put it kind of down below the cut line, if you will. The whole point of an Intel report, assessment, insight that we're going to drive to them is as briefly as possible, as clearly and concisely as possible, delivering the intelligence that supports the requirement. Not, oh, hey, you didn't ask about this, but here's a bunch of other interesting crap we found. Like, you can always have a conversation about that. But for the actual assessment, for the actual report, for the actual product that we're delivering them, hey, you asked about X, we're delivering you Y. If you want to know any of the details or anything else, we're happy to expose those to you. But it's trying to be as quick as possible because we want to reduce those barriers to them consuming it. We don't want them to sit there and go, oh, that's a nice picture of Iran. Well, if that wasn't useful to the intelligence requirement, then just move beyond it, right? So intelligence assessments are going to have different structures. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But the first thing I want to talk about with intelligence assessments is really, again, what exactly are we doing and the language that we're using. So at the end of the day, and I see this a ton in commercial reports, if you are talking about something that is a fact or an observation, just call it that. There's no assessments required. When I open up an intelligence report, I'm looking for one or two assessments because that relates to one or two intelligence requirements, or maybe I have two assessments off of an intelligence requirement. I'm not looking for every other paragraph has the word I assess or we assess, because if it's not mapping back to an intelligence requirement, you don't need to put that in there. And if you aren't dealing with 15 intelligence requirements in the same report, I don't need to see 15 plus assessments in the same report. Those are general rules of thumb. But as an example, I put in the blog here, if it's something that is a factual statement, that's all it is. It has nothing to do with assessments. Was the malware on the system? Yes or no? We don't know because we don't have the collection is a perfectly fine answer. We do know because we looked at the system and there's not malware on it, or yes, we looked at the system and there's malware on it. None of that relates to intelligence work. That's not an intelligence assessment. There's no need for an intelligence assessment because ultimately an intelligence assessment is going one step beyond the actual data. It's going one step beyond the facts, if you will. We're taking an analytical leap based on the synthesis of information we put together to say, you know what? I see the malware in the system. I see it connecting out to command and control. That malware and those command and control servers end up being used by these threats. These threats are focused on the financial sector. We are in the financial sector based on all these things that are factual statements. I assess with moderate confidence that the adversary intended to target us, not just have us as a victim. In other words, this isn't some random infection. This adversary is likely targeting us, and we are a target of their operation. So I'm speaking about an adversary's intent, and I don't have any collection or ability to collect to go and be like, hello, Mr. Adversary, did you intend to harm us? Yeah, you were my target. Like, that's not a normal interaction that takes place. And so we're going one step beyond the facts and we're making an assessment about the facts available. That would be essentially what we're talking about. That's essentially good intelligence work, if there's a requirement for that. If the response is going to be the same, the company's not going to do anything with the information of being a victim versus being a target, then there's no reason to slow things down with the intelligence work. If it's just, hey, if we have malware in the system, we're going to respond in that way, great. CTI analysts can take a step back, don't complicate anything, let people go do their work, no problem. No need for an intelligence requirement, no need for an assessment. But if being a target versus being a victim in this case matters, then we will actually put that work together. Or, hey, we saw 50 different intrusions across the company this last quarter. Of those 50 intrusions, 20 of them were successful and actually got into some level, with 3 of them leading to an actual incident at the company. Are there any groups that are associated with the 3? And are there any patterns around tactics and techniques and infrastructure they're leveraging that we could group these intrusions into adversary groups, where we would be able to define run books, playbooks, scalable detections, et cetera, against those intrusions? That's great intelligence work. Yep, cool. You have a knowledge gap or a pain point. We're going to synthesize intrusions and synthesize adversary data and come up with assessments about them. Perfectly realistic. So you will probably be familiar with low confidence, moderate confidence, high confidence. You've probably seen or heard those words before. And what I'll note with them, just like the estimate of words of estimate of language, we want to be precise with what they mean. Now, there's a lot of things that can go into it, but the short and simple version for me would be a low confidence assessment is a supported hypothesis. It's not just a guess, not just some information manifested. Now I'm guessing. If that were the case, I could just say that. Just say, we don't know. We haven't put the time and effort on this, but based on my experience, I'm going to give you a judgment. But I've told you where it's coming from, not synthesis of insights and intelligence work, but it's based on my experience. And Intel analysts, especially those that specialize in various fields, are perfectly capable members to make analytical leaps, to make analytical judgments, to talk about their experience relative to a situation. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's not an assessment at that point. It's an analytic judgment. Now, let's say, though, low confidence, as I was talking about earlier, I've got a hypothesis that is supported. It's not a guess. Now, there are other hypotheses that could be accurate, right? And maybe I've identified some of them. Maybe there's 5 or 6 possible outcomes of this scenario or hypotheses. And I've looked at them and we have evidence or an insight and data to support this one as the leading hypothesis. But we haven't had a lot of time, maybe a factor, or maybe we don't have a lot of collection, maybe a factor, or maybe it's some element of a changing scenario, Ukraine scenario right now going on with Russia, that absolutely the changing geopolitical nature could mean that other hypotheses end up getting more weighted or more information relative to them over time. So I might say at this time, based on the available information, we assess with low confidence this answer, right? And that is a perfectly supported, perfectly usable assessment. But I know on my team that it's likely single sourced. In other words, as I'm collecting information, maybe I'm only getting malware data out of Virus Total. Maybe I'm getting NetFlow information out of Team Kaimaru. Maybe I'm getting open source information out there. But even though I might have multiple sources, OSINT, NetFlow, malware database, it might not actually be multiple sources because the open source information might be reporting about what's in those malware databases. The malware database and the NetFlow may be about the same infection, and I'm still looking at the same case. So you be really careful. Just because I'm getting the information from multiple databases doesn't mean it's multi-sourced. So as I'm looking at it, I might go, this is single-sourced information. So if that information is wrong, or that source is wrong, or that source isn't as trustworthy as I would like, or even if it is trustworthy, but I know I'm missing a bunch of information from other sources, that's not something that I'm really going to be able to rely on. So again, it's a good assessment, but it's low confidence. When I get up to moderate confidence, I'm now supporting it likely with multiple pieces of information. Ideally, we're getting to multi-source, but we still might be single-sourced. But the big difference between the low confidence and the moderate confidence is I've either had enough time or resources to go analyze those collection gaps. Maybe I don't have an incident response team inside of the company to give me all the insights that I want, and I'm only operating about what's coming out of that company through those databases like VirusTotal or news sources. And so I know I've got collection gaps, but I can look at those collection gaps and determine, one, can we get around them? Can we go get that collection? Oh, and two, even if we had that collection, is it reasonable to suggest that that collection could alter what we're looking at, could alter the hypothesis? In other words, if I've got malware samples, original phishing emails, I know it's come in through a specific infection vector, I know that company is compromised, going and interviewing the CISO is a type of collection, but probably not going to get a different outcome than the one that I've already come to. So I'm not going to highly rate or weight that collection gap because it's just not as important. So moderate confidence assessment is I'm identifying and trying to mitigate those collection gaps, but I'm at least aware of them. And I've done some level of insight on, is this really going to change the assessment anyways? But if I've got something that is very well supported, I'm now in that above 50%, right? It's not the either or flip a coin kind of feel. It's, hey, 60, 70, 75%, I feel this is the right answer. Then a moderate confidence assessment is the way to go. When it gets to a high confidence assessment, this is when a predominant amount of the available information and data supports our hypothesis. We want to make sure that we're not falling prey to other types of biases or logical fallacies, like becoming anchored on one piece of information or having some level of congruence bias where we're not considering other hypotheses, right? And so I've got pretty much all of the information or close to it is supporting the hypothesis. It's not taking away from that hypothesis. And it is definitely multi-source at this point. It's possible to have a single source to high confidence, but almost never. I'm definitely going to have multiple sources that are getting to me this. And this is a all but certain, like this is a 95% and above, like it would be insane for us to be wrong about this in this given scenario. So a lot of information supporting it, multi-source. Usually there's plenty of time to really go through the assessments. And again, we've identified and mitigated those collection gaps. So if you think about these, what tends to happen, and I talk about this a little bit later, what tends to happen is folks get I would say, biased towards wanting high confidence assessments. So I put that down the bottom where everyone kind of wants to have high confidence assessments because it feels like that's a better assessment. And it is. I mean, it's totally fair to say a high confidence assessment is a better assessment than a lower moderate confidence assessment. But low confidence assessments are still the product of good intelligence work and are assessments that you can trust. They are good assessments. And if you find on your intel team that you're constantly putting out 70, 80, 90% of your assessments are all high confidence, the problem that you might be experiencing is that your consumer is overvaluing high confidence assessments. So your analysts are trying to get to a high confidence assessment because that's all they're willing to use. And hopefully the analysts aren't faking any of that. Hopefully they're getting to it in the real way. But part of the cost is now it is unlikely that you are producing intel quick enough, right? So there's those four components of good threat intelligence: completeness, accuracy, relevancy, and timeliness, CART, C-A-R-T. And when it deals with that focus, what we want to make sure is that we are getting intelligence out fast enough to support those users and those consumers. So I should actually have it where 40 or 50% of my assessments are probably low confidence, a little less or moderate, and a little less or high. Bryson, you've come on board. What's up, man?
Yep, we got a question in from Slack. How often do you or your team use ACH?
Yeah, analysis and competing hypothesis is one type of structured analytical technique. If you're interested in structured analytical techniques, would highly encourage you to go check out Richard Ure's work. And he's also, there's a Psychology of Intelligence Analysis. It's a free ebook you can go download, and it'll walk you through that. My team doesn't use ACH often. ACH is a very intensive structured analytic technique. I find it very valuable, but it would only be used for some particularly like important assessments where you want to be very methodical. And the most important thing sometimes at a structured assessment, structured analytic techniques is not necessarily that your outcome changes. It's more that you have traceability now. You actually have an understanding of why you came to the assessment you did across multiple analysts, and that can be very useful. So good question. Last thing I'll do, and then we'll switch over to the second part of the talk. When it comes to the structure of an assessment, what I would generally like you all to follow, and again, pick whatever you want, but just have something that's specific. I generally like to find that there's a confidence level, the analysis itself, evidence, and sources. Easy structure of a statement. We assess with moderate confidence that Electrum is targeting the Ukrainian electric sector based on intrusions observed at the Kiev electric transmission substation by our incident response team, as well as publicly available data from the Ukrainian SSU. So right there, anybody looking into that does not need to be an Intel expert. They get, hey, we're assessing with moderate confidence, and if we have any relationship with them, they should know what that means by our interactions across time. Then we give our analysis, and then we talk about where's the data coming from. Yeah, this is from our own incident response team as well as public information. And right there, it's self-contained into a very, very easy sentence that any consumer could use, have confidence in by having that consistency and understanding what went into it. So anyways, hopefully that gives you a little bit of view into intelligence assessments. There's a bunch of different articles and readings and videos that I'll link down here, which will be useful for you. But at the end of the day, if you're giving consistency in language and consistency in your analysis, and it's something that's transparent and generally repeatable, and you've established that relationship with your consumer on the words you choose and so forth, you're going to do a good job. Again, don't freak out about other people doing things differently. The world of Intel is a very intimate relationship between the producer or the Intel generation capacity and the Intel consumption capacity. All right. Bryson, I think there might be another question, and we can get into.
Yep, I figure we should get the threat intel ones out now. So I don't know if you can see it, but they have the results of your current take on the Pew Pew map. Nice. So we have 7% provides value for the SOC, 31% good to show external visitors, and 62% waste of dollars, should be banned.
Yeah, I was glad that he threw up that poll. Look, I'll just candidly say I am Mr. Everything is, you do you. And at the same time, that's one of the areas I draw a line and go, you are wrong if you're using Pew Pew maps and all of but the management likes it can get budget or whatever. All you're doing is training your leadership to be stupid. And if we deal in trust as Intel analysts, then I can't have something on a screen that's useless, that looks pretty and tries to get people to go to an outcome. Because all I'm telling them is I'm willing to do tricks to get you to do what I want you to do. And that is counter to everything that it is to be an intelligent professional. So it's just, to me, it's a good example of one of the few things you can actually be wrong on in the world of Intel.
Well, that also goes into eroding trust too, right?
Yes. No, absolutely. All right. So I think we got about 10 minutes left for gin and tonic stuff. So again, at the bottom of actually, I'll go ahead and share my screen again. At the bottom of the blog is this spreadsheet that I made this morning for this talk. Look, it's the same thing as Intel. This is one of the reasons I love Gin Cocktails. Gin Cocktails and cyber threat intelligence have a lot in common in the sense that, like, you do you. There's some bartenders out there and guides that are like, no, it's got to be 1.5 ounces versus 2 ounces. And like, just do it to taste. Yeah, and I'm for that purpose. Usually I have like a cocktail set and I'll actually have like a 1.5 ounce jigger and shakers and everything else. Today I'm going to keep it real simple. I'm not even getting precise on the measurements, but I put the ones that I like in the Excel spreadsheet for you. But what I wanted to do was show you how gin cocktails don't have to be intimidating. Like on the right side of the screen, like if you scroll over, we start getting into places where there's, chartreuse and brandy and creme de valette and like, as a kid from Alabama, those are all pretty big words. And I'm like, oh, that's intimidating. And so if you start over on the right-hand side, you're probably not going to get into gin cocktails. But the classic one, let's start with these. All of these can be made with just very simple ingredients, right? So if you've got your lemon juice, and just get something nice, easy, right? Real lemon's good. You got your lemon juice, you got your simple syrup, you got some grenadine, you got some tonic. You can make 4 or 5 different drinks. And this isn't the world of drinks here. But as an example, we'll start with one of the gins. I'll use the Botanist. There's a bunch of different types of gins out there, of course. What we generally like to see is natural grains, so like something that's very pure. And I like to keep the ingredient list pretty small. There's plenty of different styles out there. So like Roku gin out of the Centauri distillery in Japan, you'll notice that it's essentially grain neutral spirits with juniper. All your gins are going to have juniper in it. And then they pick like 6 local Japanese botanicals. Same thing, we've got this one here, Bar Hill from Maryland. That's where I live currently. I bought it in Maryland. It's from Vermont, but it's the local place gives it out. And this one is just juniper and honey, and then natural grain spirits. So everything's going to have a different little flavor. The Botanist is one of my go-tos. They've got a little over 20 different botanicals in here, and it's from Scotland. But one of the things that I like is if I just take, and I'll just take a, let's see, ice cube or two over here, drop it in, and I'll give it a decent pour. Again, normally you'd want to measure these things out, so I just give it a decent little pour. And if I do nothing more than get some Fever Tree tonic water, which is kind of a go-to for me as well, right? If I just poured that in, that would be the gin and tonic, right? But if I take the same ingredient list and just add a little bit of grenadine, so just a nice little splash of that, the same gin and tonic that I had with one extra ingredient, I've got another extra drink here, pour them in together and get a nice little pink looking pomegranate gin and tonic. This I'm putting down as the G2&T. Technically it's called pomegranate gin and tonic, but I just love that it's gin, grenadine, and tonic, so G2&T, or the gin and tonic. But again, if I had the same drink and started adding just a little bit of different things, I'd get a completely different drink. In this case, if I take the gin and tonic, add the grenadine, now I've got this one. And if I take the same ingredient list, but take out the grenadine, I can just put a little lime juice and simple syrup in there, and I've got a completely different drink. So all in all, very simple. Yeah, Lickety. Go ahead. You had something. Oh, yeah, maybe a little bit, but by and large, it's linked in the blog there for you. But actually, let me see if I can see on the YouTube channel. Looks okay over there. Let's get a little bit more complicated. So those are stuff that you can easily make at home. When we come over here, the next kind of class of ones to make is when you can start adding some egg whites. I find the egg whites really take a drink to the next level by having it be a smooth, kind of frothy consistency. All of these, you're going to come up with basically the same ingredients to get to. So again, I'm kind of clustering these and, hey, pick one out of these 5 with these same ingredients. Pick one out of these 3 with these same ingredients. In this case, I'll do a Clover Club. So the trick with egg whites is sometimes you'll shake things over ice, but when it's an egg white, you want to do a dry shake so that you don't break down the proteins in the egg yolk or the egg white. In this case, right, pour a little bit of gin in my shaker here. Roughly 3 ounces, but again, I'm pouring to sight. You can pour to sight if you want, but probably better to have your jigger to be able to measure it out. But again, for a computer desk in my home office, we're gonna do the best we can. So I got the lemon juice here for 1 ounce of lemon juice. Take a little bit of that grenadine that I showed earlier. I can figure out where I put it right here. So to take that nice little grenadine, right, that pomegranate flavor, put a little splash of it. And then all we're going to do is take the egg white, which hopefully this all works well in my home office, crack the egg, and then I'm going to just collect the egg yolk. You can use the shell to do that here. Essentially, if you can take a look, all I'm doing is having the shell kind of balance out as I pour out the yolk, but pour out the egg white, but keep the yolk in there, right? You don't want to break that yolk or anything like that. I'm going to take that, just the egg white that I've got here, throw it into the shaker, that off to the side. And like I said, we're going to just do a nice dry shake. There's no ice in here, just simple. And that's going to allow that egg white to be able to mix in, get pretty fluffy. It's going to make a nice drink at the end. If I want to, then I can add some ice either in there and do a wet shake afterwards, so shake it over ice, or I can just throw an ice cube or so into a nice glass, pour it out, and we get this kind of nice little fluffy looking, like little pink monstrosity here. But all in all, a nice little drink. Yeah, I know you guys can't taste it, but it's phenomenal. It was funny when they told me it was a PG-13 rated talks. It turns out there's a lot of cussing and alcohol in PG-13 movies. I don't know what they were trying to tell me there, but it's all about the same. Beyond that, another very simple drink that I'm not going to make here today, but one I could with the same ingredient list, is if I just take gin, some lemon juice, and some honey. That is the bee's knees. And you can also just add a nice little twig of lavender to it if you want to do a nice lavender bees knees. But this is the one that we'll go to next. Across the Earl Grey Martini and Royal Tea Martini, or the Royal Tea cocktail, I love these because they have tea in it. I'm a big tea fan. In the Earl Grey Martini, you would actually just infuse the gin. So as a quick aside, you can infuse gin with almost anything. Just take your favorite bottle of gin, like an aviation gin, pour it into some mason jars and muddle up some like strawberries and throw it in there, or blueberries or rhubarb or something flavorful. In this case, the leaves of one of your favorite teas, and put it in the fridge for 5 days. Every day, shake it up a little bit. At the end, strain it out. You have a nice, flavorful, infused gin. So in like a martini, as an example, what you're doing in a martini is generally gin and vermouth. In this case, though, you can do gin with some lemon juice, simple syrup, egg white, and Earl Grey infused gin. That's pretty fun. Bryson, you got something for me?
Yeah, nope. It's time to toast you off.
Oh, all right. Well, for the last pour here, what I would tell you is make some breakfast tea. Breakfast tea with some lemon juice. Throw that in with some honey. Make the honey and the tea before you chill it, but you'll chill that honey and tea with that lemon juice. Pour in some gin. Throw in an egg white in there, and it'll make the Royal Tea cocktail, which is one of my favorites. It's a nice little breakfast or brunch gin and cocktail for you. And as I said, as you go across the list, there's some more complicated ones for you. But if you're able to master the gin and tonic, add some grenadine if you want, master the Clover Club, and master the Royal Tea, 3 nice gin and tonics or gin and cocktail drinks for you to be able to enjoy over this nice pandemic. So with that, thanks everybody for sticking around. And Bryson, back over to you.
All right, cheers. Those of you who are due dry January, the talks are recorded, so you will be able to make all those drinks afterward. Rob, your spreadsheet, is that something that's going to be publicly available?
Yep. On the blog that I threw in the Slack, the one that I threw up earlier, it is the very bottom of the blog is the Excel spreadsheet that has all this information in it for you.
All right, sounds good.
All right.